can I get a grant for myself or my business? And the answer is, it depends. So we're going to unpack many sample situations where for-profits can get grant funding, but we're also going to look at situations where they can't and what you can do to creatively access it if that is not the case for you. And you do not have to start a nonprofit. That is not going to be what I recommend. So let's also step back. We're going to have a look at why do you want grants in the first place, and some yellow flags that I want you to be aware of if you are trying to break into this industry as a freelance grant writer. So we're going to cover a lot. With that, let's hit it. Yes, grants exist for for-profits. I'm going to give you some examples. For instance, here's the Rasmuson Foundation, a regional grant entity, very famous here in Alaska. They have the Individual Artist Award Program. So this goes to individual artists, some of which have businesses set up. For instance, here's Michelle of Utqiagvik, so Alaska, way up here, tippy to top. And she's doing a project to bring, create coloring pages that actually reflect the Inupiaq ways of life and regalia, food, etc. So it's really cool. Love it. It's very beautiful work. So this would be an example of a for-profit company or an individual receiving grant funding. Another example, this is a friend also, launch company located in Anchorage, Alaska. They're an aerospace company and they were able to get a lot of interesting grants. Much came through, much of their opportunities were research grants from the federal government. So probably the most common grant you've heard would be SBIR, so Small Business Innovation Research Grant. They also have STTR, Small Business Technology Transfer Programs. These are complicated. Multiple different federal departments have them. I don't really need to go into the specifics of SBIRs, just know that here's another example. So what kind of for-profit businesses have the most grant opportunities? And I'd say there's sort of two main direct categories. One, you're doing super innovative research work, whether that's healthcare based or agriculture based or Department of Defense based, right? Like you're doing something super crazy innovative and it's risky. And so the US government or any other federal government is willing to go in on that risk to help de-risk it, to get it to commercialization, to move our world forward, right? So we've seen a lot of that in energy innovation, for instance. Okay. Also, I'm seeing it for creatives or individuals or people that are really pushing forward like in a grassroots way on causes that are hot topics for the time, right? So take, for instance, activists for protecting a super threatened environmental area, right? So sometimes they will be able to receive funding or it'll go to a activism entity that's not actually a nonprofit to be able to go do their great work. Now, does this mean that grant funding can go towards paying for your house or paying for just growing? Like this instance, for instance, this is a screenshot from a question brought up in our community group recently saying, hey, I have a friend who has a culture consulting agency focusing on DEI consulting. Can she, raise some grant funding to scale faster with staff and technology? So operating costs. And this is where things get really sticky. And that's what I want to bring your attention to so that we're not being overly optimistic or delusional, but practical. So maybe you're finding that, I don't really fit into those other categories where it makes a lot of sense for us to be able to get grant funding. So do I need to start a nonprofit? Super common question, get it asked all the time. In fact, just had a call yesterday with a awesome for-profit company that went crazy through the roof with growth during COVID. They serve those that are developmentally disabled and need some in-home care, and they do a community-based model. So it's not an institution model. It's saying we will come to you and give you a high quality of life and care. So they've just been super, super busy. But all of their funding is dependent on a waiver program through the state that they live in. And when the state cut that program by 3% and they had to increase wages to be competitive, they were in a real pickle because they have no other revenue source. So they were thinking, do we need to start a nonprofit? And the answer is probably not for this reason. Even if you had a nonprofit status tomorrow, and let's just keep in mind the fact that you don't actually get that designation overnight, by the way, it's like a expensive and long drawn out process. Most grant agencies, they want to know that you actually have some qualifications, that you have processes in place, that you're definitely not all volunteer based. You probably have at least a salary of $90,000 or an annual budget of $90,000 a year or more, right? So just starting a nonprofit is not really the solution. The questions I want you to be asking yourself are, what are you ultimately trying to accomplish? What ultimately is it that you're trying to get at? Who else can we be partnering with? And what part of what you want to do or are already doing do you actually most love? Because I'm going to guess it's not paperwork to maintain your 501c3 status. One of the most powerful tools in your arsenal, if you are a for-profit business, is considering fiscal sponsorship. So fiscal sponsorship is where you have a partnership, a very established agreement with a 501c3 nonprofit that can serve as your administrative home for your cause. So they're able to basically, the grant funding routes through the fiscal sponsor, right? And they receive it, hold it, manage it, and then pay out for your expenses or your costs to run your program. And that means you get to focus on what you most love and you most want to do. And maybe that's because you're thinking that you need grant funding right now. Maybe you haven't actually achieved product market fit. You haven't quite found a sustainable model, right? And you're still experimenting and figuring it out. Well, they can provide that safe home for a few years while you do. The catch is, for a fiscal sponsorship, for them to be able to do that, there has to be it helps building capacity for charitable projects, right? So the example of my cousin and her two business partners running this business, it is a strong charitable purpose. It is a need that's not being met by our public sector because they can't keep up with it. Families that need help because daycares won't take their child, right? Because of their developmental delay or whatever. So, or even trauma injury, like brain trauma injuries, not being able to get into, you need different care for a period of time, and there's just not enough public services to keep up with it. So that's an example of it's very much a charitable project. They would very much benefit from a partnership with a fiscal sponsor, like perhaps a United Way, as they figure out we've clearly proven there's a need, we have tons of demand, how do they take it to the next level? So hopefully that helps make a little bit of sense. So the thing about fiscal sponsorship is, let's just roll back and think about what you really need. Your big idea or your business or whatever, it needs funding, I'm going to guess, administrative infrastructure so you can actually manage a grant, and you need the tax exempt status of a 501c3 so that you can be eligible for grant funding. Okay, so that's where fiscal sponsorship comes in. I'm a very big fan of this specific YouTube video. I have a blog post about it, so you can go click to it. So if you go into our blog, so resources blog, and then just search fiscal sponsorship, you'll find this. But anyway, if you come down, you can click on this video. It's a YouTube video put on by Propel Nonprofits, and it's just great. It really talks through what it means to have a fiscal sponsorship and where it's appropriate and where it's not. So you can get nerdy on it there. But the reasons fundamentally to use it are, like I said, you're partnering with an organization that already has street cred. They have a lot of credibility, contacts, etc. It gives you a chance to focus on what you most love doing while being within the structure of an organization that can handle the grant portion. And it just gives you, it just helps you with the administration side of it all, right? If you've never received a grant, it gets hard to receive a grant when we don't have that track record. So really just kind of helps you get your feet underneath you. That said, what I really want to draw your attention to is maybe the reasons you want a grant is because you need money, right? Why do you need money? Is just money going to solve the problem? Or do we have an underlying business model problem? Hands down, my favorite tool is the business model canvas. I literally used this the first day I started my business, January 2018. Look at where we are now. So every time I have a new idea or new iteration, I go update this business model canvas. It's really cool. You can research it online. You can find lots of ways to learn about it. But essentially, it's putting an entire business plan on one page. And so if you feel like, okay, we know our customer that we're serving, we know our value proposition's dialed, but man, we are weak on key partners, or our revenue stream, not diversified enough, we are vulnerable. What else can we do here? Like, there's so many different ways you can tweak, experiment, and then come back, iterate, and do it again, right? It's a circle of a process. So something to consider. Okay, so that's the fiscal sponsorship. That's one camp right here. I talk about this a lot within our course. So I'm going to just shut that down because that's a whole video unto itself. And I'm going to shift to another strategy. So another strategy, if you're a for-profit business, is leveraging grant writing as a business development tool. So if you know anything about my background as a grant writer, you know that I got my start writing grants for an architecture and engineering firm. I wrote infrastructure grants literally all over the US, particularly Western Canada, and specifically Alaska because that's where I now live. And so we were a for-profit engineering firm helping our clients get grants because writing them is not a walk in the park. I developed that expertise. So did others in the firm. We'd help the community get the grant funding, and then they could use that grant funding to help pay for the engineering services required to make that project happen, right? So we were not the recipient of the grant directly, but we were indirectly a recipient by being a service provider for the project. So what's cool about this is that you can do this, and literally there's an infinite number of creative ways. Where think about, is your customer a nonprofit? And if so, can you help them receive grants so they can pay for your services, right? So here's an example. You have a for-profit music program. They partner with schools, okay? So a school receives and manages the funds, but they then can pay for your music program, and you're getting hired and paid through it, but you also help them win the grant so that they would pay you, right? So that would be an example of how you can leverage grants as a for-profit business, as a business development tool. Now, for that to work, you have to bring the grant writing skill to the table. That is how you're bringing value, because they're going to be taking on the work of actually managing and housing that grant, right? So the reality is I just threw a lot your way, but if we were to break it down and summarize it, it's to think about it this way. I want you to make sure that you actually are eligible for grants. And if you're trying to figure that out, one of your options is going to our website, going to the Hire a Grant Writer page, and requesting to work with one of our grant writers. They could do a funding strategy for you. And then you'll know right off the bat, hey, is there any grant funding available? And maybe there isn't, maybe there is, but you'll know, right? Okay, so that's an easy starting point. The next thing to think about is, okay, if we know for a fact that we definitely don't need to go peel off and start a nonprofit, but we could examine the fiscal sponsorship route, go do your research on it. It's a very cool option. Totally recommend it. I think it's very interesting. Or you can look at it as a business development tool where you should invest in your own grant writing skills so that you can use that to help also fund doing the work that you most love. I just had a call yesterday with the coolest chick in Philadelphia, Jordan, and she just started a horticulture trade program, and she also landed a $15,000 grant to run some programming with a nonprofit she cares about, and then she ended up putting all that programming together, and basically it paid for her time to do that. And what a great creative way to express what she most loves doing and getting paid to do it. And she wrote the grant to do it. I mean, it doesn't really get better than that. So there's a lot of ways to come at this. I just want to be real about, no, it's not as easy as for a lot of nonprofits. So think strategically, right? Like, learn more about grant writing, decide if this is really something you want to go down that path, or do you just want to work on your business model and there's another way forward. So there's no right or wrong way to do this. Welcome to post a comment in the video below if you want to talk about it. But otherwise, hopefully this video was helpful for you in understanding some of your different options. Okay, hit the like and subscribe button if you have enjoyed this and want to see our next video. We drop them weekly. And my friends, that is all. All right, we'll talk to you later.